CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis joins me now for more. Hi there, Olivia. So the Colonial Pipeline is the latest in a series of high-profile hacks. Secretary Mayorkas says the administration is addressing it. Do we know how?
Right. Elaine, today administration officials outlined what was underway in the immediate term, medium term, and long term. The Energy Secretary said that the pipeline should be substantially operational by the end of this week and over the weekend, but that in the meantime, the EPA had issued a waiver to several states to allow them to use non-compliant fuel in order to up the fuel supply in the short term. She said that the government was enlisting railroads to help transport fuel if that became necessary. Of supply, she said that this was a temporary crunch, but not a fuel shortage, so that people did not have to feel the need to go hoarding fuel, and gas stations should not be price gouging for it. As you mentioned, the Secretary of Homeland Security said in the medium term, his agency was going to be surveying critical infrastructure to make sure that they shored up any weak links in other infrastructure that might be exploited. And then more broadly, the administration has been foreshadowing for weeks now a broad executive order meant to shore up the country's cybersecurity defenses. Based on what we know about it now, it's not clear that it would have prevented an incident like this one in Colonial. So some big fixes still do seem to be elusive from the government's perspective.
Well, in the meantime, Olivia, we have learned that a group targeting the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department has released officers' personal information, like psychological evaluations and credit histories. How are these attacks evolving?
Ransomware is a huge problem, Elaine, and it's getting bigger. The former CISA director, Chris Krebs, recently told Congress that we are on the cusp of a pandemic, not a health pandemic, but a pandemic of digital incidents like these, where criminal enterprises get savvier and more sophisticated and are able to better target their attacks. It makes sense that when hackers get more money, they can afford to wage bigger and better and more sophisticated incursions. We already see evidence of that in the evolution of how some ransomware works. Normally, when you think of ransomware, people associate it with hackers coming in, taking a bunch of data, encrypting it, and saying, give us X amount of dollars or Bitcoin, or you won't see it again. Increasingly, these attacks are now like the one that you just described. They coincide with threats of document dumps and going public with sensitive or proprietary or embarrassing information. So even if a company has taken steps to lock up and back up its sensitive data, if it doesn't want it out in the public to begin with, these ransomware attacks are just as effective. They're not a new problem, but they're a growing one. And this incident with Colonial and with the police department illustrates just how vulnerable some systems and entities continue to be and how hard good solutions are to come by.
Olivia, you mentioned document dumps. DarkSide has dumped stolen data from companies that did not pay a ransom in the past. Do we know if Colonial has made any ransom payments?
We don't currently know that, Elaine, and we may never know for sure whether it does wind up paying a ransom unless the company itself chooses to disclose that information. Or, of course, if something happens and that indicates that a ransom wasn't paid, i.e. sensitive information gets poured out into the public sphere. The Biden administration on this front has said that it doesn't offer advice in one way or the other, that this is a purely private sector decision. In the past, the FBI has said that it does not support paying ransoms because, again, successful ransomware attacks beget successful ransomware attacks. But officials have acknowledged that a lot of entities that are targeted wind up paying because they literally can't afford not to. One thing we know about Colonial is that it's one of just many incidents to otherwise go it is one of many incidents that otherwise go undisclosed or unreported. These attacks strike much less prominent targets like schools, like hospitals, like local governments all the time. Probably safe to say on a near daily basis. And what these targets don't know and aren't told is whether to pay those ransoms. And we understand that most of them do because they just don't see that they have any other choice.
It's so sobering, Olivia, to hear these details that a lot of people, I think, are just beginning to learn about, and the need to harden defenses. It's something I know you'll continue to follow closely. Olivia Gazis for us. Olivia, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elaine.